On October 18, 1867, in a remote place called Sitka, hundreds of Russian and American soldiers stood together to salute the flag. Subsequently, the Russian flag was lowered, and in its place, the new American flag with 37 stars representing Alaska was raised. Alaska was officially transferred from Russian to U.S. control for a price of $7.2 million, equivalent to approximately $131 million in 2021, a surprisingly low cost. Alaska, a state of the United States, is located at the northwest end of the North American continent, bordering the Canadian provinces of Yukon and British Columbia. To the east, it faces the Arctic Ocean, while the north and the rest are surrounded by the Pacific Ocean. The region is a strategic point dividing the two superpowers by the Bering Strait, and despite the misconception that Russia and the US are far apart, the land border between them is only about 4 kilometers. Alaska is not only a detached territory of the US but also the largest and farthest detached territory in the world. Its estimated distance from the rest of the US is about 800 kilometers. With an area of over 1.5 million square kilometers, Alaska is the largest state in the U.S., more than twice the size of the second largest state, Texas. Additionally, Alaska boasts the longest coastline, stretching up to 54,000 kilometers. Now, let's delve into the main question of why Russia had to sell Alaska to the United States. While some might think Alaska was forced to be sold at a cheap price of $7.2 million after a defeat in a war, the reality is different. The Alaska deal was actually a fair and honest agreement between Russia and the United States. However, the price Russia received was indeed cheap because Alaska was renowned for its abundant gold mines and mineral resources. Explaining why Russia sold the largest state in the U.S. with a current GDP of $50 billion requires considering various reasonable factors. The motivations behind Russia selling this territory include both strategic, financial, and political reasons. To understand more about the political and historical context, let's rewind to the 19th century and explore Alaska's situation before the sale. At that time, Alaska was an international trade center in its capital, and merchants traded a variety of goods, including Chinese fabrics and ice. Russian America Company, RAC, led by Russian merchants, controlled all mineral and coal mines in Alaska, conducting independent trade agreements with other countries under the permission of the Russian government. The Russian government granted them significant privileges as it not only received substantial taxes from RAC but also owned a major share in the company. In fact, Russian emperor and royal family members were significant shareholders of RAC. However, decisions at Russian settlements in the U.S. were made by a talented merchant named Alexander Baranov. Under his leadership, RAC thrived, with Baranov expanding educational institutions, teaching local people how to grow crops, building fortresses and ships, and engaging in fur trading. Despite the success, conflicts arose within RAC after Baranov retired. New leaders in RAC, mostly military personnel, quickly seized control, leading to the company's decline. The new leadership set exorbitant salaries for themselves while drastically reducing wages for ordinary workers. In less than 20 years, Eskimos nearly eradicated seals, the most valuable resource in Alaska. These conflicts led to an uprising, and Russia responded by violently suppressing coastal villages. The decline of seal resources and the failure of other economic activities pushed RAC into financial distress, and it started receiving subsidies from the Russian government. Despite these subsidies, RAC's fate was sealed, and Russia had no intention of selling Alaska at that time. The turning point came with the Crimean War in 1853, half a world away. During this time, Russian Emperor Nicholas I aimed to expand territories to the southwest, particularly in the region now belonging to Romania. Europe was caught between the two powerful nations, Russia and the Ottoman Empire, and smaller powers like England and France did not want either Russia or the Ottoman Empire to gain more land in Europe. To prevent Russia from expanding, England and France sided with the supposedly weaker and declining Ottoman Empire. The war between the Ottoman English-French alliance and Russia lasted for 3 years. Despite French bravery leading to victory in Sevastopol, Russia's Pacific Fleet was also overwhelmed by the British Navy near the Chow Cha Sea Islands in the Pacific Ocean in 1855. In 1856, the Treaty of Paris was signed, bringing unfavorable terms for Russia. Moscow immediately realized it could no longer provide support or protect Alaska as Allied ships gradually controlled the sea routes. Even the renowned gold mines of Alaska declined, and there was concern that the British military might block Alaska, forcing Russia to leave. Moreover, continuous war expenses strained Russia's finances, bringing the country to the brink of collapse. Political pressure and financial strain made selling Alaska a not-so-bad option. Alaska, with its vast and remote territory, was deemed too challenging to maintain. The leaders of Russia themselves understand that they would not be able to defend this region if the United Kingdom were to truly attack. It's crucial to remember that the eastern territories of Russia are sparsely populated, and the distance between St. Petersburg, the capital at that time, and Alaska was too great. Additionally, the transportation system at that time was extremely limited, with travel between the two locations taking several weeks by boat. The tensions between Moscow and London were escalating, while their relations with the United States were warming, almost becoming allies at that time. Both Russia and the United States had some level of competition with the United Kingdom. Moreover, Russia and the United States were simultaneously considering the idea of selling/buying Alaska. For Russia, a successful sale would weaken the influence of the British Navy in the Pacific coast. The United States would act as an eastern barrier for Russia against the British. Regarding Alaska, at that time it was seen as a land that had more benefits than drawbacks for the United States. Russian leaders anticipated that sooner or later, the United States would aim to dominate North America. At that point, Russia might not escape losing Alaska. From the Russian perspective, if the United States continued to expand its territory as it did with Mexico or Texas, it was better to sell Alaska for some money rather than losing it forcefully. Furthermore, with Alaska, the relationship between the two nations would improve. The United States strengthening would also mean that Russia's eastern border would be less threatened by the British Navy. For these reasons, official negotiations between the two countries were initiated, led by Eduard Andreevich, the Russian envoy in Washington, and the U.S. Secretary of State William Stord. Both quickly agreed on the Alaska Exchange Agreement. However, public opinion in both countries opposed such a deal. Russia believed it was giving away a land where they had invested a lot of effort and time. Americans questioned the need for this icy land, along with the 50,000 Eskimos eating breakfast by drinking fish oil. Nevertheless, there were some opposing reactions to the Alaska purchase from Russia. Clearly, Alaska would be a crucial stepping stone for the United States to expand commercial activities from Asia, despite minor objections from both sides. The deal proceeded swiftly, and on March 30, 1867, in the capital Washington, the agreement was signed. Russia agreed to cede 1.5 million hectares of land in Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million, which equates to only $4.74 per square kilometer. The official transfer ceremony took place in the capital of Alaska just 6 months later. In the same year, Americans began confiscating all buildings in the city of Novak Angel, renaming the capital of Alaska to Sitka. Hundreds of Russians who did not want American citizenship had to leave on merchant ships. From the time of the purchase until 1896, Alaska seemed almost abandoned with few inhabitants. It wasn't until Americans discovered the precious mineral resource called gold in Alaska that the land became lively again. The gold rush made Americans and their settlers recognize the enormous economic potential of this land. The value of Alaska even skyrocketed during World War II and the Cold War due to its unique geopolitical position. But it's evident that Alaska's value isn't solely because of gold. In reality, Alaska possesses numerous other rare mineral resources such as silver, copper, lead, and petroleum. In the late 20th century, the main income of this region relied heavily on petroleum. However, by 2020, Alaska's oil production was at its lowest in 40 years due to the global economic downturn caused by the pandemic, leading to a significant economic setback. Nevertheless, Alaska's budget deficit, estimated by economists, was over $1 billion, a colossal figure. The revenue from oil was no longer enough to support the region's economy. Fortunately, the Alaska law enacted in 1976 mandated at least 25% of oil revenue to go into a long-term investment fund. As of now, after more than 4 decades, that investment fund has grown to a value of $70 billion, much larger than the budget deficit. Certainly, Alaska and the United States as a whole will have to seek a more secure and diversified economic path instead of relying solely on the current oil supply in the future.